Thank you. I mean, fantastic to be here. To James for inviting me. Always a pleasure. Welcome, Jay. Last. This happens to be the only guy I know in the room, would you believe? We used to work together years ago. It's a small world indeed, it is. Incredible to be here. Always an iconic venue. Particularly, this is a kind of strange version of Warwick University for me because I actually went to Warwick University, 1983 to 1989. You can do the maths. That I left over 30 years ago. I did chemistry. I didn't do business studies. I'm pretty sure the business school that you know today, the big modern fancy building, that wasn't there in my day. In fact, half of Warwick University wasn't there in my day. But I'm pretty sure there was a business school. So I love being a student. I did 3 years degree, 3 years PhD. I did chemistry. I think I mentioned chemistry. And I really enjoyed being a student. I loved the lifestyle. I learned a lot, not just about studies. But eventually, I hung on as long as I could by my fingernails. But eventually, I had to go out into the real world. And so 30 years later, what have I been doing all this time? Well, I was doing this. I spent a career in industry. I started, because I had a technology base, I started in a multinational, in an R&D center. So I was a technologist. I'd talk a little about the products I was working on later. And I started at the bench and then into R&D management, technology management, and then up into, out into the divisions. And I was technology director, and then I switched to business management, which is kind of what you do. You guys are here for. And I became general manager, then MD of a small global division, then a large global division. And then I went back to technology management, but strategic technology management. So I was technology director for the Asia region, which is, I think, probably where I bumped into Jay. And then eventually Chief Technology Officer for the whole global business. So that was 30 years. And it wasn't an entirely straight line because at one point I moved to China. In 2011, I moved to China to build a factory. So nothing to do really with what my previous roles had been. But I had a great opportunity to build a factory out on the other side of the planet, a completely different culture. Again, you learn a huge amount about yourself as a person, the challenges both culturally and business-wise, and the kind of crazy situations you get pulled into and have to deal with. And you learn a lot about resilience and just standing on your own 2 feet, and a lot about real business, not corporate plush office business, but real on-the-ground business. Some of the things you have to deal with are quite incredible. In fact, quite incredible enough that I wrote a book about it, but that's another story. So just like being a student, I loved living in China. I loved the whole culture, the whole experience. It was just so different. And I hung on by my fingernails as long as possible. My 3-year contract became a 4-year contract, became a 5, became a 6. And just over 6 years, somebody at head office noticed that Andy, the expensive expat, was still out there. And I was recalled back to the mothership. And by then, a real pivotal moment in your career. You think 30 years is probably enough, you know? It's time to do something different. And I just couldn't go back to my old life, my old house in the UK. So I didn't. And we decided, so I stepped out of being a corporate slave. And I stepped off the corporate mouse wheel, and we decided to move to Spain. My beautiful wife and I. Say hello, beautiful wife. So we moved to Spain. That was 2 years ago. And I had a number of personal projects that I wanted to do, to take some time out. One of those, I wanted to set up a consultancy business, which is called TTIP. I have one slide on that in a moment. but also I wanted to take stock of what the hell had I been doing for 30 years. So I sat down and wrote a book. I thought, what have I learned about technology in business? Because you'll see from the roles I've had, I was always on one side or other of the technology fence, either creating and producing new technologies and products, or on the business side, delivering those to the market, or building a factory based on them. So I've had a career that has looked on both sides of that technology fence. And so I decided I wanted to write that down, and so I wrote a book. I wrote this book called Transforming Technology into Profit. And that's a book about essentially the process of innovation. It was about what I'd learned over the time about how to create ideas, how to generate ideas, how to create new products, how to commercialize them successfully. I'm going to be talking you through a few of those concepts this afternoon. I didn't stop there. I then wrote a book called The Biggest City You've Never Heard Of, which was about life as a Western expat living in China and all the challenges and crazy stuff that goes on. So not a business book, just a fun kind of read. And I've just finished book number 3, which I'm calling Cracking the Industrial Innovation Code. And I realized after I'd finished book number 1 that there was more to say. There was more, whereas book number 1 was about the process of innovation, book number 3 is about how the structure of an organization and how the culture impinge on its ability to create new products, and how in fact they hold it back. And so what we're going to be talking through over the next hour is elements of 1 and 3. Just a word on our consultancy business. So TTIP, consulting, TTIP, transforming technology into profit, if you didn't work that out. We work with industrial and high-tech businesses to help them unlock their ability to innovate, to create new products. And we work with them on a holistic basis. You'll see our approach as I walk through the slides. We work with, I say industrial and high-tech, and that's because the people we work with, that's the network we have. We've all spent a career in industry. It's not that these things I'm going to talk to you about are not applicable to other sectors. It's just that this is the world that we know. And we have consultants in Spain, UK, France, USA, China, Japan. So, by way of introduction, long career, I've worked on a number of new technologies, a number of new types of products. Some of them are pretty cutting edge things, pretty interesting and sexy science and technology. So I worked in things like, this is a turbine blade, this is a superalloy, high nickel, titanium superalloy, and these, a whole bunch of turbine blades that go together to make a jet engine. So I set up a business in China producing components that go into that supply chain. Next, I worked in electronics, specifically semiconductor. So I worked with companies like Intel and suppliers to Intel. This device is called a CMP, chemical mechanical planarization, and it's an ultra pure silicon carbide material with a diamond-like coating on the top. And essentially the device is for making silicon wafers ultra flat so that you can deposit other layers of semiconducting materials on top and produce a silicon chip and a microprocessor. And certainly when you work in the kind of technology, industrial high-tech business, if you're sitting in the plush corporate offices of global giants like Intel, it feels pretty good. It feels like your career is going somewhere. I worked in other sectors. I've done a lot in automotive, particularly in the time in China, high-speed rail, alternative energy, wind turbines, huge growth market sectors in China over the last 15, 20 years. So I worked in things like, this is called a pantograph. This is essentially 2 long strips of carbon. It sits on top of a train, high-speed rail, and essentially it interfaces with the overhead electrical cables. So it's how electricity gets into the cab. So you can sit on your Wi-Fi. Wind turbines, this device is called a slip ring, and it's the heart of the turbine. It sits behind the windmill part, and it's the heart of the turbine because it's the part that transforms the rotational energy into electricity and down into the grid. But probably some of the most rewarding things I was involved in, medical devices. I worked on things like, this is a ceramic hip joint. We worked on things like knee joints and other prosthetic materials. And when you're in that sector, you get involved in some pretty gruesome stuff, I have to say. Probably the most memorable, the most satisfying to be involved with was, this is a cochlear implant. So half of the device is implanted into the brain. It has a lot of electrical connections. It's called a neurostimulation device. And the other part sits on the ear, and it's technology to make deaf people hear. So how life-changing is that? And so why would I run through these with you? You know, what does this matter? Well, there's a common denominator when you look back at things you work on as a technical person. You find, as you run through your career, it's very interesting, and you get to use technology and make money from it. That's business. But really, when you look back, you realize that what you are doing actually matters. It doesn't matter what the technology is. What matters is what it does. And all technology, all innovation improves the quality of life, either directly or indirectly. Directly through medical devices, but also indirectly. You know, you're making better use of the world's resources. You're getting from A to B to using less fuel, for example. It all matters, but you have to look at what it does, not what it is. Don't get lost by the science. And I think I've done a lot of customer trials I've been involved with over the years, but probably the most memorable one was seeing videos of this device. When you see a young child hearing its mother's voice for the first time, and I feel quite emotional talking about it now. It's incredible to see what some of the things you're involved with actually do. But interesting times. I did a lot, but it didn't start out like that. I actually started out in concrete technology. I started out as a young scientist, and I was sitting in a laboratory mixing one grey powder with another grey powder, adding some water, casting hundreds of 3-inch dull grey cubes, doing thousands of hours of environmental testing and hundreds of hours of physical and chemical testing, and really life didn't seem so great. It didn't feel like your career path was going somewhere. It feels pretty aimless. But in fact, what I was working on was high temperature concretes, and I was actually working on developing a new lining material for a petrochemical installation, huge installations. And with the higher temperature lining materials, it would allow the petrochemical company to produce run their processes at much higher temperatures, reducing the cycle time, improving the yield of their products, reducing the amount of energy they would use, saving hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's a big deal. That matters. And of course, it's making better use of the world's resources again. And if, for example, you're working on civil concrete, at the kind of dirty end of science, maybe you're working on higher temperature, higher strength concretes, which would allow designers to build things like longer, taller bridges, and think what effect that has when you're linking different parts of a country together that had previously poor connections. Think of the trade, the commerce, think of the new business that brings into a region, and the new jobs it brings. improves the quality of life. Technology and innovation improves the quality of life. So it doesn't matter what the science is, it matters what it does. And so if innovation matters, why are companies so bad at it? So, a study by McKinsey, this is 2 years old, I think. You all know who McKinsey is, I'm sure. One of the biggest management consultancies in the world. Maybe you work for them, maybe you want to work for them. But 2 years ago, they released a study on innovation in companies. They surveyed hundreds of companies, and what they concluded was that 84% of the executives running the business agreed that innovation was a critical factor in their growth, a top 3 factor in their strategy for growth. But surprisingly, of those 84% who thought it was important, only 6% of them said that actually their business was any good at it. Only 6% were satisfied with the way their business was running innovation programs and creating new products and opportunities. So quite a gap there. And I read into that 2 things. So number 1, I see a business opportunity, which is why I set up TTIP. But also number 2, I see an amazing admission of guilt by the likes of McKinsey, etc. Because it's not just McKinsey doing these innovation reports. Innovation is a kind of hot topic the last few years in business. And so Bain & Company, LEK, A.T. Kearney, all those big management consultancies, they're all doing these kind of reports recently. And whilst their numbers might differ, the broad conclusions are the same, that businesses largely agree that innovation is critical to growth, and mostly agree that they haven't got a clue what to do about it. So I think it's an incredible admission of guilt, because just think what McKinsey and co do. They've been spending years and decades trying to help businesses grow in lots of ways, one of which is helping them improve at innovation. Kind of suggests that they're not very good at it. And if we look at growth, we link innovation with growth. Bain & Company study, this was, I think, 3 years ago. So they surveyed lots of different businesses, and they found that on average, they discovered 89% of businesses struggle to grow. And by growth, they mean sustainable, year-on-year, incremental top-line growth. And when they asked the people running these businesses why they felt that their 89% were struggling to grow, they didn't say it was market forces, or they didn't say it was competitive activity. They said it was due to these internal factors, things completely under their own control. Quite startling. And these are not stupid people. These are people who highly professional, a lot of experience, many I'm sure with an MBA, and yet 89% of the companies they're running struggle to grow. So it really isn't easy. So if you're in a business that's struggling with growth, you can have feel perhaps some good that you're not alone, but it's a not great feeling to be. So innovation, growth. So what we're going to look at is what those internal factors are. So if we understand that there's something about what's happening within your business that is holding back its ability to innovate, create new products, add new revenue streams, what are they? Well, in my career, I've observed 4 reasons, and this is number 1. So the first reason that businesses, I believe, struggle with innovation is that innovation is an investment. It costs money. But as you'll know from your studies and your experience, there are other ways that a business can spend its investment, other ways you can put your bets down. Organic or inorganic growth. So, for example, you can build another production line, or build a new factory, maybe out in China. You can hire more people. You can invest in improving their skills. In organic, you can go and buy another business, acquisitions, or you can do some kind of business partnership, joint venture and the like. All of these are investments. But again, there are many studies which show that the investment which gives the longest, most sustainable growth is innovation. It's creating new products with new functionalities, adding new revenue streams, and that takes you to market leadership. It takes you and keeps you there if you have that perpetual chain of innovation. Yet in my whole career, I've always observed that businesses don't treat innovation as an investment. If you're building a factory, it's a capital investment. Your finance team will be all over that. There'll be checks and balances everywhere to make sure that the money is spent on time, it's not overspent, etc. And the same with if you're doing an acquisition. You'll have due diligence, you have the finance team all over it. When it comes to innovation, that's not treated in the same way. And often in certainly industrial and many high-tech businesses, innovation is considered R&D, it's considered a different subject. And so it's not treated as an investment, and so it's not managed financially in the same way. And that's a big mistake when it's your business. So that's the first reason I see that businesses struggle with innovation. So here's the second reason. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the innovation funnel, the most simple model that management consultants use to talk about innovation. And it's a funnel because you have to stuff a lot of ideas down the funnel. You go through some kind of choosing the good from the bad, and then you have to make the good ideas happen, and out drops a new product. Well, many businesses struggle with innovation because they kind of see it as something that involves a eureka moment. Somebody comes up with a bright new idea and they're going to save the company. Well, innovation really isn't like that. This is the real world. I don't think I've had a eureka moment in 30 years. I've never seen anyone have a eureka moment in 30 years. What I've seen is a lot of hard work. And another study. This one is much older than 2 or 3 years, but I like to quote it. It's still relevant. So these guys, they surveyed a whole range of different businesses, from one-man startups to billion-dollar multinationals, from private equity to public listed companies, lots of different industry sectors. What they found that on average, in order to get one successful new product onto the market, on average, a business needed around 3,000 raw ideas, basic ideas. 3,000 to 1. You know, it's not a eureka moment. It takes a lot of ideas to stuff down the funnel, sort out the good from the bad, and come up with something successful. And many businesses don't appreciate that, and so they don't have processes to capture ideas, etc. We'll look at that in a moment. And not only do they misinterpret this this idea versus eureka moment. Number 3, innovation is not a simple process. Innovation is not a simple funnel with 3 steps. It's actually a highly complex process with multiple stages that you have to go through. And each stage requires a different set of skills and lots of different people coming together to manage the process from creating ideas to final successful commercialization. And because of that, businesses have, over the years, created lots of different processes in order to help manage the data. Think of the 3,000 to 1 ideas to product. And of course, a business won't just be working on one new product. There'll be multiple new product cycles going on in there. So it's not 3,000 ideas. It'll be thousands of ideas your business needs to be sifting through. And because of that, businesses have created processes to manage all that data. And not only that, the processes help people to focus and work together. which is the most important thing. But not only do businesses struggle to appreciate the complexity of doing innovation, they also often underestimate the time and money it's going to take. This is back to the investment thing. If you've been in an industry that, if you've been involved in creating new products, you'll know that in reality, to take an idea to a successful product can take at least 5 years. It can take a lot longer than that. And in all that time, your business is spending a lot of money. You know, it can take you 5 years and $10 million. And throughout all that time, you're spending money and you get zero return. That's why it's an investment. You have to think of it in that way. It's only when you start selling that you start to reap some of the money back, let alone making money from it. So it's a big commitment from any business and needs to be taken seriously and with managerial due diligence. So we're just going to dive into 2 or 3 of the tools that we looked at. So first of all, how do you create ideas? I said it wasn't a eureka moment. There are lots of sources of ideas for new products and for creating new revenue streams when you go about your daily business. I put them into 2 buckets, so I talk about internal source of ideas and external. So number 1, internal. So in your business, you will have lots of sales reports, project review reports, and market reports, and they're kind of swimming around. They're documents that email to people, and you read them, you come up with ideas. There are documents which are used as a focus for meetings, business development meetings, for example. So all of this kind of information swimming around, it creates ideas in people's head whenever you read it and you see opportunities. Brainstorming events is a classic idea generation technique, quite often misused, I think. It's not kind of get everybody in a room and let's have some great ideas. It's only successful if it's managed, that there is a process, there is a facilitator, and really brainstorming needs a clear scope about what you're trying to achieve. So it's best used in a targeted way. And in red, does that come out red? But that's supposed to be red. So in red, I put technology roadmaps, because in my experience, these are the best sources of commercial ideas. And I've got 2 slides on those to dig into that, okay, to tell you what I mean. So external ideas. Your business, you need to be scanning your horizon. You need to be looking out in the industrial area, who's patenting what new products are coming out, who's working on what technology, what's coming out of universities, for example. Market intelligence, you need to understand what alliances companies are doing, what partnerships are happening or likely to happen, particularly through sales channels and the way that they can merge. But ultimately, the best source of external ideas is talking to your customer. But that is easier said than done. Because if you think about your typical daily contact that your business has with customers, you know, what are they talking about? They're talking about day-to-day stuff. They're talking about delivery times or terms and conditions of sales and just the stuff of day-to-day business. It's actually quite unusual to have a conversation with a customer to consider what their needs are for the future and to kind of direct a conversation that way. And it requires a certain skill. And that's some of the value of things like voice of customer exercises, because essentially it's a script of questions you can ask. So you can force a dialogue in that way. But also, it's not for everybody. You need a certain type of person, mindset, to have that kind of future conversation with people. So, lots of sources, ideas, if you consider them. I'm going to 2 slides on technology roadmaps, because I like technology roadmaps. I've done a lot of them. There are various kinds of technology road mapping. But the one I found the most commercial value and benefit from is what I call a market-led technology roadmap. And essentially a roadmap, this is a schematic. I'm going to show you a real one next, okay? So this is a schematic which shows the concept. Essentially a roadmap, you're looking forward into what's happening in your market segments. And you're looking at the trends about what's happening. And if you consider 5, 7, 10 years time, if you know your market, you'll know where they're heading. Often things like new legislation coming in that's going to affect the way they have to do things. And if you anticipate that, so if you know that in 5 years' time they're going to need, this is going to happen to their business, then you can work back and say, well, what does that mean to my business? If in 5 years' time they need to achieve this, what can I as a business give them or sell them to help them achieve that? And that's essentially going to be a product or a service. And once you know that, you can work back and say, okay, well, if I know in 5 years' time I'm going to need to give them this to stay in business and to capture that opportunity, then what technology, what new designs, what new materials do I need to create? And you can actually work backwards to help design what R&D and innovation programs you're going to need to do now in order to be ready for the future. It's crystal ball gazing. And one of my clients, when I talked to him through this, he called it, he said, oh, it's like reverse engineering the future. And I thought that was a great phrase. So here's an example. You remember the wind turbines I talked about, okay? You remember the slip ring, the device which sits behind the windmill. Well, this is a small slice of a technology roadmap that I actually did 6 years ago with a company in China, a company that made slip rings for wind turbines. So their road mapping session was focused on the Chinese market. So just a simple slice. All we're going to look at is the top line here. Okay? We're not going to look at the rest, just to illustrate how it works. So you think about wind turbines. You think about what they do. When they're installed in huge wind farms, hundreds or thousands of wind turbines together. So, of course, where do they put the wind farm? Where there's a lot of wind, of course, because it makes it profitable in terms of electricity generation. But, of course, China's put a lot of wind farms in a lot of places. And so over the years, all the wind farms get put in all the most windy places. So eventually, if you want to put another wind farm, you're forced to put it in an area where there's less wind. It's logical enough, and it's a real trend for this industry. And so eventually, they anticipate that in 5, 6 years' time, in fact, we've got here now, by sheer coincidence, that they'll need to put wind turbines into environments where there's less wind. So if you're a wind turbine producer, if you want to stay in business, you need to redesign your wind turbine to be able to generate sufficient electricity with less wind. Otherwise, you're going to be out of business. So that's a real need of the customer. So what does that mean to my customer, the guy that designed and sold the slip rings? Well, if he knows that's coming, he can say, well, what can we do with our product to re-engineer, redesign, create new materials? And then all this techie stuff down here is what they decided they would do in terms of product development and new technology development. And they could realize that they needed to start now, 2014 now, in order to work and be ready to capture the opportunity. Crystal ball gazing, very effective. So, I've talked about generating lots of ideas. What you're going to do with all those ideas, okay? I said you'd end up with thousands of ideas. How do you decide the good from the bad? Well, in fact, you don't. Good from the bad is not the right terms. There isn't a bad idea. What you have to do is you have to assess the credibility of the idea against your business strategy. which of these long list of ideas is going to help you deliver the business strategy. Now, how you do that, you ask a set of questions. So it's assessment criteria. So you ask a set of questions. So you ask a set of strategic questions against each idea. Does it fit the strategy? Is it going to help us deliver? Is it safe? Is it ethical? These kind of things. Then you ask a bunch of technical questions. Do we have the expertise? Do we have the knowledge and equipment to be able to do that idea? And then you ask a bunch of resource questions. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? That kind of thing. So essentially, you're asking three questions. You're asking, should we do it? Can we do it? And can we afford to do it? So you have all your list of questions. You assess them against simple criteria. You can just have an Excel spreadsheet. Just have a list. And then you rank them. And then you have the top of the list are the ones which are most likely to help you deliver the business strategy. And then you just draw a line. And anything above that line, those are the ideas you're going to develop. Those are the ideas you're going to work on in your business. Now, where you draw the line, depends how deep your corporate pockets are. Again, back to investment. How much are you spending on innovation, creating new products, new services maybe? So that's the first kind of process of creating ideas and generating ideas. So you've got your list of priorities. Now you've got to make them happen. Now you've got to make them real. And in industry, we use a classic method is called the stage gate process or the phase gate process. If you're not familiar with that, it's simply a way that recognizes it's a long and complicated process, so it splits it up into smaller, more manageable parts. So those ideas that you decide to work on, stage one, you will flesh out the proposal, you'll create a business proposal essentially. You look more deeply into the idea, say, is it real, is it viable, is it really going to deliver? And then you go through what's called a stage gate meeting, which has all the team and gatekeepers and senior management. You go through a detailed checklist to see, is it viable? Is it going to pass that? And then you go into stage one, which is the definition. So that if you think it really is a good idea, then essentially you create a detailed plan with costings, resources, etc. If it passes that, then you go on to the feasibility, and that's essentially the R&D work. That's actually where you physically start to do stuff in a lab or a workshop, or essentially you're creating a prototype. If the prototype passes all the specs the targets you set, then you do a pilot scale up, then on to productionization and on to commercialization. So that's the way industry generally carves up the process of project management. The software industry uses something called Agile, you may be familiar with. There's reasons why they're different. They're both good processes, and they're both applicable within their environment. They've been going for at least 20 years, so there's been some attempts at kind of merging the two, so you get things like Agile, Stage Gate, and all these kind of weird modern stuff. But and there is a bit of a endless academic debate about which is best, Agile. They actually say Agile versus Waterfall. In software, they call this Stage Gate process Waterfall because it cascades from one to the other. And in my experience, it's not really about whether one process is better than another. It's actually much more important that you have clever people who are committed and stick to the process, whatever the process is. But also, it's not only project management. I remember your business will not be working on one project. You'll be working on multiple projects. So portfolio management is a critical process and skill you have to develop. So you might have 20, 50 projects on the go, depending on the size and scale and complexity of your business. And so how do you decide which of those are the most important ones, the ones you really need to do? Well, that requires portfolio management skills. And there you'll be looking at things like timescale of delivery. So you don't want all your projects, new business and new development projects to deliver next year, because you won't be able to cope, and then you'll have nothing happening for the next 10 years. So you need projects which are delivering next year, the year after. You need to balance long, medium, and short. And you also be balancing things like how much resource you're putting in them, likelihood of success, etc. So there's lots of different ways to cut the data. But you do, it's a discipline you need to maintain constantly as well. It's not just a one-shot thing. So we looked at briefly how to create ideas, how to do the projects. So presumably you've got some successful projects, you've got new products you want to commercialize. Well, there's plenty published on what checklists about what to do before a launch, at the launch, and post-launch as well. I'm sure you could have another big MBA module on that. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about, I've got one slide on, in my experience, the reasons new products fail. And over the years, I've seen 9 reasons why new products fail. Some of them are linked, but you'll get the idea. So, number 1, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, if it's your startup, if it's your wonderful new idea for your new product, or in the corporate environment, if you've been working on a project for 5 years, you want it to work. You don't want to see it fail. And what can happen is, over that time, particularly if it's your idea, your baby, the product might be 95% fantastic. It's just got this little niggling 5%, 3%, little issue about performance or how to use it. And over time, it just doesn't go away. And over time, you kind of start ignoring it. And you think, okay, well, let's just launch the product. It'll work itself out. Big mistake. Linked in some way to, if you launch it before it's truly ready, particularly, again, think about the corporate environment. Think about you've spent 5 years of your life trying to make something work. And you spent $10 million of the company's money. Think about the pressure that you're going to get from the board. We've given you 5 years and we've given you $10 million to make this happen. We keep seeing the project every month, progress reports. Look, just get it out there. Think of that pressure. If you launch before it's truly ready, your customer base will quickly find out that little 2 or 3% of problems. And you'll be up to your neck in replacement products, reputational damage, this kind of thing. Don't do it. Number 3, the other thing that tends to happen in a business is if you've got a team have spent 5 years on creating and testing something, it's finally commercialized, you've had the launch date, you've had the big launch party, your product's released out to the community. What tends to happen is oh, thank God for that, right, okay, next project, let's look at the next project, and they move on. In fact, the project's not really over. Just because it's gone out into the market, you really need to factor in the fact that you need to resource not only commercial support, but also technical support. You know, things happen with your products that you never anticipated. When, particularly in the industrial field, you'll find your products put into working environments they were never designed for. You'll find end users will be using products in ways you never dreamed, using and abusing them in ways that you never anticipated. Now, if it's outside the warranty, it's not an issue commercially, but you still need to smooth that over. But also, it's an incredibly valuable source of information for the technology team in particular. Your market is essentially testing the boundaries of what your product can and can't do. And that's really valuable in terms of helping you improve and get the next generation better. But it's also really valuable in terms of creating new ideas for new products, next generation. Number 4, there were 2 occasions I can think of in my career. I actually wrote about these in my last book. There's a chapter called Technical Successes, Commercial Failures. And two projects, one was 15 years ago, one was 20 years ago, where team did a fantastic job. Great opportunity in the market identified, customer interest, fantastic science done. The team did a wonderful job, groundbreaking stuff in terms of what it could achieve, what it could physically do. A lot of customer positive trials. Never sold any. And looking back, it was because the products were ahead of their time. The mindset required of the end users was just too big a leap. And they were just happy with what they had. So that can be a killer for you. So timing is everything. And again, that links to, think of the technology road mapping as well. That's all about timing and getting products and technology right for the market. Number 5. I said we moved to Spain 2 years ago, okay? Put a nice villa, all the new furniture, kitted out the kitchen. So we got this fantastic new top-of-the-range microwave oven with all the LEDs, all the little buttons to press, all the little programs you can put in. And what we found after several months is that we just stopped using it. We're using it less and less, and because every time you wanted to use it, you had to get the instruction manual out. It was just too complicated to use. So what did we do? We downgraded. So today our microwave oven has 2 dials. It has power and time. That's all you need. Project technology led. Much easier to sell a new product if you started with the market need. If you started with talking to your customers, looking at the market, understanding what their challenges are, what their pain points are, what their trends are, again, technology road mapping. If you start with that and then work back and say, okay, so what product do I need to develop? What technology do I need to develop? Much easier to sell it. Unfortunately, most businesses don't do it that way around, particularly in the industry and technology-led, technology-based businesses. A couple of reasons. One of them is, a mature business, it has a legacy. It's good at what it's good at. It's good at technology that underpins its products, whatever they are. Maybe they design adhesives or something. The chemistry of creating adhesives is their specialization. So they're not going to be very good at designing a jet engine, for example. They're very different technical skills. And so what happens is a lot of businesses start by saying, well, what are we good at? So what else can we do with that? And that's technology-led opportunities. And particularly happens all the time in spin-outs from university. Think about, often universities, science are creating incredible new science, and then there's this kind of drive to make money from it. Okay, you've got a great piece of science, what are we going to do with it? And what happens is, when it's technology-led, is that businesses try this kind of scattergun approach, kind of let's try it here and try it here and try it here, hoping that something is going to commercially take off. The best example today that you'll all have heard of is graphene. Okay? Graphene is the ultimate in technology-led opportunities at the moment. You hear graphene put in everything. Running shoes, in tennis rackets, in the surface of roads. They try it everywhere. It's on the news, you can read a piece about graphene every day. And it's a technology-led exercise. Now, graphene is a little different because graphene will work. Graphene will make money because back to the investment. Think of the billions of dollars that the US and the Chinese government, and to some degree the UK government, are pushing into this. So the investment will steamrolling it, and something will come out of it. Already there's over 1,000 businesses around the world in the business of manufacturing graphene. At a small scale, but everyone wants a slice of the action. Graphene is unusual. Generally, technology-led investments don't have the resource, and they just, it's by sheer luck almost that they find an application. Number 7, benefits versus features. So when you, I'm sure you're all aware when you're marketing and targeting a new product, you have to get the language right, and you need to focus on the benefits for the customer. Again, what happens within an industry, and it doesn't have to be an industrial one like my background. I'm sure if I went into the office in any one of your businesses, if I walked into the office, people would be talking about customer codes or some kind of technical jargon that's relevant to your business, or some other kind of bullshit. And every business has its own internal language, which means nothing to the outsider, but it's the kind of way you talk within your business. I worked in a business that made high temperature fiber, ceramic fiber, for kind of 1,000-degree plus use for lining industrial kilns. And so the internal language there was people would talk about calcium aluminosilicate ratios. They talk about aspect ratio of the fiber, of shock content and thermal conductivity values, and things which mean nothing to anyone outside that business. Very important when you're developing products, but of little importance to the people you're trying to sell it to. And so what tends to happen is, imagine you've got a team who've worked for 5 years on creating a groundbreaking new product. What physically happens in your business is, okay, finally done it. So the technical team and the marketing team sit down and they start preparing the PowerPoint presentations, the web literature, and the scripts for talking to prospective new customers. And what happens is that kind of internal language bleeds out into all that literature. And so when we launched products, I found that this business, this ceramic fiber business that Jay will know very well, I'd regularly see documents that talked about, we've reduced shock content by 50%. Okay, fantastic internal achievement, huge pat on the back technically, means absolutely nothing to the customer. You need to talk in the language of the customer. So this was high temperature insulation. So for the customer, what does he use insulation for? To save energy, to keep the heat in his kiln essentially. So all he's interested in is, if I buy your insulation, how much gas will I save? How much less gas will I need to buy to run my kiln? Number 8. So this same business, ceramic fiber. So this business had been working for 10 years on groundbreaking new technology that was going to push the use temperature of the product up to 1400 centigrade. Groundbreaking material science, really difficult, big opportunity if you could do it in the marketplace. And the team struggled, a lot of challenges, many times that the project was going to be killed, but eventually they got there. Enough money and enough effort, enough commitment, and after 10 years they got there. So they got the release date. Okay, they were going to commercialize. We're going to have a big launch event. Got the date in the diary. Invited all the customers. 3 months before we launched, our number one competitor launched their version of the same product. And we've been working on it for 10 years. You really need to keep your eye on what the competitor's doing. And the final one, regulatory approvals. I've seen new products collapse because they don't have all the right approvals. Increasingly, particularly again in the industrial environment, a lot of health and safety regulations, environmental regulations, and of course, if you're in a multinational business, they're all different in different countries, and they're all changing all the time. It's really hard to keep up with these things. It's a full-time job, so it's if you're not diligent, if you're not on top of regulations and the changes, your new product could be obsolete straight away, or could not be used for whatever reason. Particularly, of course, if you go back to the kind of medical devices and pharmaceuticals, etc. They live and die on that. So, those are the 9 reasons why I've seen new products fail over the time. So I said there were 4 reasons why I thought industry or businesses were not good at innovation. I've only actually covered 3 of them so far. Don't worry, there'll be a recap at the end. So we've got to number 4. So the 4th reason that I've observed businesses are not good at innovation is eventually they kind of wise up to the fact that they need a process, and they might put in some ideation processes, improve their project management, put in some commercialization processes, and they get better at it over time. They hire specialists, maybe they'll buy in some fancy software for project management, and they get slicker at the process of innovation, and they think, yeah, we're good at this now. But in fact, it rarely moves the needle. It doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the business's ability to innovate and grow through new products. And the reason is this one, that businesses fail to realize that innovation is not some kind of standalone thing, and it's not kind of let the innovators in the corner and do their stuff. It's actually part of the real business, the day-to-day business. So it has to be done within a real business. And there are, as I said at the start, there is a whole structure and organization and a whole culture which surrounds this ability to create new products. And so it's this, you remember at the start, you remember the internal factors that I had in red? So the internal factors come from, it's the way that the organization and the culture impinge on this process. And it's these touch points which create the barriers, create these internal factors. And those are the things we're going to identify, okay? Those are things you need to understand what's happening in your business and then you can do something about it. And because of this, I have this phrase, I talk about the biggest barrier to innovation is your own business. So I've come to realize that innovation just isn't a process. I see there are 3 tiers to successful innovation. You have to get the organization right. And by that I mean reporting structure, accountability, ownership of projects as they're handed over or not between different roles. The process we've talked about. And then culture, attitudes, behaviors, the way people and teams work together and collaborate or not. And the whole business of team working and team dynamics. That's rolled up in culture. So you actually have to look at all 3 tiers in order to unlock the ability of your business to grow through innovation. And what I've come to realize even beyond that is that there's actually I see two competing organizations within any mature business. One I call the day-to-day organization. So that's the bit of the business that actually makes money. Okay, that's the machine for make product, sell product, ship product, collect the money. And that's the traditional hierarchical structure that we all use, that we all see with a boss and a finance team and a technical team, and etc. But in fact, what I see is that there's a second part, and I call it the innovation organization. And that's the part of the business that's there to deliver growth, create new products, add new revenue streams. And you've already seen that that is quite a different style of techniques and processes and mindset and attitude. So you'll be dealing with a lot more risk and ambiguity, etc. And because of that, an innovation side of the organization, it doesn't work well with this kind of hierarchy or silos. You need a much more collaborative structure, one that is less focused on this kind of reporting lines, and a much more holistic approach that understands that the functions overlap, and it's where they overlap that's important. Now, your business can have the best technology team in the world, it can have the best salespeople in the world, it can have the best production team in the world, but if they don't work together effectively, nothing new is going to come out, and your business isn't going to grow. Of course, often people on this side look at people on this side as overhead. Remember, from day one, this side isn't making any money. This side makes all the money, and so there's an attitudinal issue. What people on this side seem to forget is everything that they make and sell came out of this side. Okay? This fuels the mature business. This was happening in the past that created today's business, and it needs to continue that fuel. And what I've come to, again, realize over time is that how good businesses are at creating and growing through innovation is essentially down to how well synchronized these two halves of the business are, the day-to-day and the innovation. It's how well they work together. You need both. It's not one's better than the other. You need both, absolutely, to maintain and grow a business. So in terms of synchronization, you'll know if you're working in a business where these two sides are poorly synchronized. You'll feel it because you'll be working in an environment where you have too many meetings, poor collaboration, a variety of attitudinal barriers. You might have a lot of good ideas floating around, but they seem to disappear into this corporate black hole. It may sound familiar. I've certainly worked in businesses like that in the past. And from the outside, you will see a business that is pretty slow in bringing new products to market. And if they do, they'll generally won't live up to expectations in performance or return. And generally a business that is underperforming in terms of new business development. But if the two sides of your business are in alignment, well synchronized, again, you will feel it. You will know because you'll have high levels of collaboration. It'll be a collaborative environment. You'll have shared goals. There'll be clear processes. From the outside, you'll see a business that publishes clear targets and metrics related to innovation, and has a clear strategy and plan to back it up and deliver it. And essentially, you see a business whose percentage of new products is growing year on year. Now, of course, that's nirvana, that's the ultimate. No business is quite like that. Every business is somewhere between the poor and the good. So how do you know where you are, and how do you get better? Because remember, to unlock the ability to grow through innovation, you need to get more synchronized, you need to get better. Well, you do this by looking at remember the 3 tiers to successful innovation I talk about. So you need to essentially dig into your business, audit your business in terms of structure, process, and culture. So in terms of structure, you'll be looking at things like reporting lines. You'll be looking at how well the different functions interact with each other or not. Process, you'll be checking, do they have tools for capturing ideas, commercializing products, etc. And culture, you'll be assessing the general levels of team dynamics, the quality and maturity of individuals in the business, and generally assessing the degree of collaboration going on within teams, within departments. So, and in this way, you will identify the internal factors that all those executives at the start, remember on those surveys, who said that it was internal factors holding back their ability to grow. This is how you can identify them. So for example, this is just company X, you know. So for example, structural barriers. You might find that that there aren't forums where the technology and the sales team meet, for example, or you might even find that the guy who runs the technology department hates the guy who runs the sales department. They don't talk to each other. This is reality for you know. Processes. You might find a business that has a lot of good processes at the front end, but maybe they don't have any processes for commercialization. Or culturally, you might find a business where there's not a lot of collaboration going on. And I recognize that in order to do this effectively, a business needs to do this with an external partner. And this is why I set up TTIP. And the reason you need to do it with an external partner is because when you've identified the barriers, the things in your business that are hindering and holding your business back, then we recognize that some of those barriers are best dealt with by the company themselves, particularly things like reporting lines. Okay, the businesses can deal with that. But equally, there are some things, particularly the cultural side, where it's best dealt with by an independent external person. Think about the culture. You're dealing with people's attitudes and behaviors, and you really need somebody who is outside of the bullshit of office politics, somebody who's seen as an outsider and is not going to be part of the day-to-day team. So I said I would recap. I said, through all those busy slides, I said there were 4 reasons that I've observed in my career why businesses are bad at innovation. And they are. First one I've seen, that innovation is not treated as an investment, but it's a big investment. Number 2, innovation is not a kind of eureka moment. It requires a lot of ideas, and they're difficult to capture and do something with. Number 3, innovation is not a simple give it to the innovation manager kind of thing. It's a very complex process involving the whole business. And number 4, we've observed that innovation is not just a process. You need to have the whole of your business oriented in terms of the way it's structured and the way that people behave in order to unlock the ability for business to innovate, not to hold it back. So you've heard, we're almost at the end now. You've heard the theory. So you've heard all the kind of how it all works. I'm just going in now with something more practical. So you've heard the theory, you heard the mechanics of how it's supposed to work. What can you actually do differently? There's a lot of things to consider and absorb in there. So I'm going to give you these are the top 5 tips, the top 5 things I've learned to physically go and do. So when I go into a business, these are the things I do in order to make all the rest of it happen, okay? So number 1, it all starts at the top. So your CEO, or president, or whatever they call themselves. So if that person is not on board with what you're trying to do, if that person is not part of the innovation solution, if they think it's not important to growth, if they think even it's important and they just want to delegate it to somebody else, then they are going to be a barrier to what you are trying to achieve, to the transformation that you're going to have to do in your business. And they will become a barrier because, of course, culture starts at the top. The way people, the person at the top, the way they behave, the language they use, and the way they make things important or not, that bleeds throughout the whole culture. And so if you get the vibe from the person at the top that innovation isn't so important, then no one in the business will think it's important. So you have to, you start with a conversation. That person has to be on your side, or you have to get them on your side. Otherwise, I don't take the job, because it's never going to work. Number two, you need to build a process. You've seen the mechanics of an innovation process. You've seen it can have many, many different parts to it. But you need to create a process that is appropriate to your business, to the size, scale, and complexity. It doesn't have to have the all singing, all dancing, Microsoft Dynamics CRM solution. It needs to be appropriate to the size and scale of your business. You can start with a simple list. Creating a list and talking about it and prioritizing, that's a process. It can start there. You can build and add to it later. Because what you may have seen already in your careers, if you put in clever, comprehensive processes, particularly if you've done them and you think, oh, this is great. Often they're too complex, and they often ask for information that isn't available in the business. And what happens? People quickly stop using them. It has to be appropriate. So number three, the third thing I do when I go into business is I get to understand the structure. Who reports to who, where the sites report in, what the divisions, reporting structure, etc., depending on the, again, scale and complexity of the business. But in fact, I'm not looking for the structure, because there is no ideal structure to unlock innovation. All structures can work, all structures can fail. What I'm looking for is these interfaces, the functional interfaces. Where are the touch points that people actually get together? Who are the key people? Because those are the ones I'm going to spend my time on. It's oiling the wheels, if you like. So number four, focus down the project portfolio. So in my last real job, a CTO, first thing I did was I did a survey of all the new business and all the new product development activities which were going on around the organization. And it was quite a large business. We had a lot of sites all over the world. So I made a big spreadsheet, got all the data in, and I found that the business had, around the world, it had 1,200 projects going on. 1,200 projects. There's no way a business can keep focus and deliver all those projects. It just dilutes the efforts. So, and this is back to the portfolio management I mentioned earlier. That's why it's so critical. So what I do is every business needs to have its top priority projects or programs. Sometimes you find you can bundle together small projects into a bigger program because there's a lot of commonality. So in fact, whatever your business, you need to have no more than 10 projects, preferably no more than probably 7. And those are the 7 projects that are going to make the biggest impact on growth for your business. And once you've decided what they are, then you need a relentless discipline on making the damn things happen. So that means full project management, that means all the KPIs, that means progress reports, that means those projects are on everybody's lips, they are at the agenda item on every board meeting, it has high profile, and everybody involved in the business knows those are the priorities and they take their part in delivering them. That's the way you make an impact, and that's the way you change it. So, last slide now. We've come to the last slide. I've been very patient and unusually quiet. Must be the after lunch thing, I guess. So I said at the start, what I talked to you about came out of these 2 books. Because I had the thinking time, I said, because I don't have a real job anymore, so I had the opportunity to sit down and think about how it all worked, how business works. And often, when you're actually doing a real job, there's so much going on. You don't have any strategic thinking time. Even though I had a strategic job at the last few years, you don't really have a strategic thinking time. So I had an incredible opportunity to sit down and think, how did it all work? How did that succeed? How did that fail? And so what I talked to you about, the process of innovation, came out of book 1, which is here. And what I talked to you about, the effective structure and culture, that's continued and expanded in book 2. I'd say it's not out yet. I've written it. It's kind of started in editing mode. And the other thing I did differently was book number 1. That was me. That was my brain dump. Okay, that was my 30 years onto a paper. Okay. Now, I did something different with book 2. You'll see some quotes here like this. And so what I decided to do is I didn't want just my thoughts. I thought I would challenge myself and talk those through with other people in my wider network. So I had the opportunity to talk these concepts through with other senior innovation and technology leaders. So people, for example, like Alexa Dembeck, she's the Chief Technology and Sustainability Officer is her title in DuPont. $86 billion multinational, the biggest chemical company in the world. And I was privileged to have conversations with the new CTO of Johnson Matthey, of Imerys, a big French mining and materials giant, and 3M. Everyone knows 3M. So there's a lot more contributions in there, and for me, it's enriched my thoughts, and I think improved the quality of what I've been able to talk to you about today. So, final thought. I've talked to you about the mechanics. I've talked to you about the moving parts. I've talked to you about business processes, etc. But actually, like much in business is actually about people, and innovation is no different. All the processes and all the theory, it's all very well. It helps you understand, but ultimately, if you can't get people to work together and collaborate, you're never going to grow your business. So that's what you need to focus on. So, thank you very much. Thank you.